On this week's Real Talk, we are going to talk about a lesser-known heroine, Queen Vashiti.
Yeah, and we'll talk about how we develop our spiritual muscles in the midst of opposition and unlocking the power of fasting with your faith friends. Coming up.
Hello and welcome to Real Talk. Come follow me. We're so grateful that you have joined us. Hi, John.
Hi.
How you doing?
So good.
Guess what?
Do you know what? I say so good every time.
Guess what I say?
What?
I love that. I love that. I love everything. Everything in the scriptures is my favorite that I love.
I purposefully say so good.
Good. I'm glad you're so. Maybe one week you're going to surprise me.
You're like horrible.
Why am I hosting this show with you?
I feel great.
Okay, guess what? We're just talking Esther this week.
Esther, we get the opportunity to study Esther the whole week this week.
Yeah,
so,
it's not one book of scripture, but it is one book.
Yeah.
It's many chapters, but it's all Esther.
But it's kind of cool to be able to have a really sort of single focus in your scripture study for a week.
A little bit of a backstory on Esther and what we know of this book. It's one of only 2 books in the Old Testament that are named for a woman, so I think that's noteworthy.
Totally.
It provides an excellent illustration of how there is a power for influence and good, and we're going to talk about in an environment that may not be good.
Right.
We're going to talk about that today. She was an exiled Jew in Persia and rose to the position of queen. And then what do we know about who wrote this book? We don't know a lot. We don't know who wrote the book of Esther, but we do know that many of the scholars place these events between around 482 BC and 478 BC. So that gives you some context of what's happening within the Jewish community. And this first few chapters are about how Esther rises in power and becomes queen. Yeah. But you're going to share some thoughts about context. And culture.
Yeah. Chances are, if you do a really sort of slow, detailed study of this book, you're going to encounter some things that, are brow-raising. And that might even be disturbing to you, But again, this is totally on brand for the Old Testament in terms of God uses imperfect, God uses flawed, weak individuals and accomplishes his work. He makes order out of chaos, all these beautiful themes, right? And Esther really is not different, in terms of the story as a whole. I want to start with chapters 1 and 2 specifically, and just develop some background that lays the groundwork for Esther's coming into being a queen. So we start with a king and a queen. King.
John makes fun of the fact I skip over names.
Assuerus.
Okay.
And Queen Vashti.
Yeah.
Okay. So the king has this big celebration, maybe a political sort of gathering. It lasts for days.
With feasts and...
Yeah, with all these feasts and all these other princes and rulers and things like that. Meanwhile, his wife Vashti, the queen, is also having a celebration with the women in a different place. Well, after days of sort of partying up with his friends and counterparts, the king orders Vashti, the queen, to come before them, Esther 1, verse 11, because he wanted to show the people and the princess her beauty, for she was fair to look upon.
Some misogyny.
Yeah, this is the objectification of women, and we know that that's not it's not a modern phenomenon. It's been around forever.
We have many scriptural accounts.
Right. This isn't like a tender, I want everyone to see my wonderful wife. This is a clear objectification. We learn that because of Vashti's courageous and I would say self-respecting response. In verse 12, Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him, okay? So he and his wise men, they don't know how to react to a strong-willed woman who has a voice, who refuses to be objectified anymore. And so they scramble. And they're like, we have to punish her. Listen to their reasoning. I'm sorry, this is really hard for me to read through because I was getting a little heated and protective.
Really upset about it, yeah.
I really was.
Which is understandable.
Yeah. Esther 1, 18 and 20. This is what they say. Likewise, the ladies of Persia and Media say this day unto all the kings and princes which have heard the deed of the queen, okay, thus shall there arise too much contempt and wrath. In other words, if we don't punish her, every other woman's going to think they can just stand up for themselves and have a voice.
There will be chaos of women speaking their mind.
Chaos, the status quo of the patriarchy.
The kingdom will be overthrown by women saying, "You will not objectify me."
Right.
Yeah.
Verse 20. When the kings decree that he's going to punish her, when that shall be published throughout his empire, for it's great, all the wives shall give their husbands honor, both to great and small. So the oppressive status quo can continue, okay? All right, so I read through that. I'm sorry, I was just like, I just got mad. I don't know, mad for my wife, for women who deserve every bit as much as a man to be able to speak their mind and be respected and treated, with decency. So Vashti becomes one of the unsung heroines of the Old Testament for me because she was banished. She could have been put to death, but they banished her. And that's what opened the need for a new queen. He's like, you won't do what I say? And they banish her. She's exiled, basically. And so here opens up this vacancy for queen, and the way they propose to find a queen for him is just horrifying as well. It's basically, let's just make a big empire-wide beauty pageant, or and we'll see whoever you like best, and that's who you get. It breaks my heart, especially from a modern lens, to see the treatment of women on such a large scale.
You mean like a show called The Bachelor, maybe? Where
right, it does seem like that, right? Sort of the ancient equivalent of just complete objectification, dehumanizing, things like that. And so before we even begin Esther's process of coming to be a queen, think of just the historical context, and let's just celebrate and honor Vashti and her courage of standing up in a context, in a situation like that, and saying, no, I refuse to be objectified. High five.
And you know what? I'm just really grateful you're my co-host, and you're like, no, we're going to talk about this, because I'm going to guess that you may Google and find this kind of information, but to put it in context and to have a conversation around some of the cultural norms that we acknowledge we are removed from. And if we were visiting a different culture, we may be jarred by certain things because we're in an area where people are worshiping and practicing things we're not used to.
Right.
I understand that when we read the scriptures, we are literally having that experience.
Right. Good point.
But like all scriptural study, what are the truths that we can apply, and what an opportunity this week, instead of just jumping into maybe more of the well-known dialogue around Esther, to step back and say, let's talk about Queen Vashti. Yeah. So I appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, of course.
And I think it is also important to note that likely Esther is a very young bride.
Yeah.
Possibly 14. Right?
Yeah.
Traditionally speaking, culturally speaking, in the research, that's what you might find. And here we have this young girl who, as we see in Esther 2, verse 7, is brought up by his uncle's daughter. So she doesn't have a father nor a mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, who was the uncle, right, when her father and mother were dead, took her for his own daughter. So here we have an orphan who is young.
Who's a slave.
Right?
Being raised by her uncle.
And I would just like to say, for me, as a mother of a daughter with the middle name Esther, who has raised her daughter to talk about this person and her spiritual gifts, they came in the wake of opposition and grief.
Yes.
And I think often we also develop our own spiritual gifts, spiritual muscles, because there's been opposition, there's been loss, there's been trauma, I would even say, for her, right? And because of that emerges this version of Queen Esther that I think can, even within the context we've already talked about, inspire us to live within our own opposition and what will emerge when we face that. Barbara B. Smith said in 1979, I was
love it. I love
8 years old.
I love throwback
Yeah,
quotes.
yeah. She said, each woman in today's world has a responsibility akin to those which Esther faced. The circumstances of each life are significantly different, yet each woman faces the challenge of being true to the principles of the gospel if she would improve the quality of her mortal life and make herself worthy of the opportunity of eternal progression. She should begin by understanding who she is and that she has a magnificent potential as a daughter of God. Her goal then should be lofty. The scriptures say, "Be therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect." Quickly, I caution that this is not an obtainable goal in one step or in one day or in 1 year. It takes a lifetime of conscious effort of striving and learning and living to become a holy woman. And I would just say, in the wake of my sister's death, both of my sister's deaths, job loss, I can say that it was in those spaces that the principles, the things I valued, it was really like rubber hits the road. Am I going to turn to those things? And I would just say, here is Esther in a situation that was challenging, and she had come from loss. And I think we see pretty quickly that she uses some spiritual tools that I would go out on a limb to say she developed because she had been orphaned and then a young bride and of a totally different religion and culture, really, like very much alone. How are you going to handle it when you're in those situations? And we see we're going to have this play out in these chapters about what plays out for her.
Well, in the spirit of our program's title, Real Talk.
Being real.
Yeah, I think of sometimes like, so I've taught seminary now, for 18 years, and all of our depictions of Esther are very, very rosy in terms of we have videos and stuff we show, and she's just this
Perfect,
beautiful girl that just but her life was not. It was not that, according to the record. Obviously, we don't have all the details, but what we do have would indicate that she would have come through this process of becoming a queen with quite a bit of baggage carrying with her, and you've went through some of that, right? And so that's all of that. I think we're going to make the point is kind of beside the point in terms of what she eventually accomplishes. And maybe, I guess, all that baggage we carry eventually obviously plays an important role in who we become and the strengths we develop. But Esther is in the scriptures because she made a choice when it mattered most. And she saved an entire nation because of that choice. Yeah. And that's why she's here. And so
God can use you even in the worst of circumstance.
I sometimes wonder, it's like, why do we struggle so much with sort of like dealing with uncertainty, dealing with messy stuff like that? And I started thinking of the book of Esther as a good sort of reflection of that same tendency, where there's a lot of messiness to talk about in the book of Esther, but we never do, right? We're just like, nope, don't think so. Let's focus on this happy little thread, right? And then we wonder sometimes why we struggle with nuance. Why we struggle with complexity.
And our friends that are of the Jewish faith have a whole different record. Like there is a lot more that's been fleshed out. Like our Old Testament King James translation says she was beautiful, but I have studied other translations where she was considered ugly.
Right.
So think about orphan, ugly, young, being thrown into this area where it's a disaster, it's chaos, it's misogyny.
Could be totally different than our current narrative. I was talking to a friend of mine who's currently studying, to get her graduate degree in Old Testament studies. And he was talking just about what you said, source texts for the Old Testament, for the KJV, bears out this narrative, but other source texts
totally different story.
Yeah. So.
But I think it's important to note that in most of the versions and the translations, what we do get is what you were just referencing.
Yes, and that's what we hope is to focus on.
Right. You take this young bride and you put her in the middle of this chaos, and what emerges is that she turns to her faith friends. We see in Esther 4:16, where she asks them to fast ye for me and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my handmaidens or my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to law. And if I perish, I perish. She's like, listen, I'm going to ask my faith friends to fast with me because I'm about to go before the king and I'm going to try to save my people. And I need you to join me because my faith is, and if I know my maidens, my friends, my faith friends are with me, then I might still die.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go forward and do that. That's remarkable.
Yeah.
If you think about all that we've thrown out as a possibility of what the backstory was, that she went in with that kind of faith. Sister Johnson, which we talked about her just a few weeks ago, in October 2021 said this: Esther is another beautiful example of letting God prevail. Rather than sticking with a cautious narrative of self-preservation,
Yes.
you
Yes,
cannot
right,
argue that, right?
Right.
We can agree on that.
Right, and you can respect how she
Right.
would be operating under, given the context, the misogynistic sort of,
Right.
context we talked about. Yeah, self-preservation would be a very natural way to go.
I just saw an interview with Elizabeth Smart 20 years after her captivity that she said, every day for what? I think it was 9 months. I did what I needed to do to stay alive.
Right, crazy.
Esther could have just focused on self-preservation, implying that her initial actions to become queen were done under this pretense. She exercised faith, turning herself completely over to the Lord. Haman was plotting the destruction of all the Jews in Persia, all of them, right? Mordecai, Esther's relative, became aware of the plot and wrote to her, urging her to talk with the king on behalf of her people. And so as she fasts with her friends, I just think of the power of my female friends and how they have joined me in power of fasting and prayer. I have turned to them multiple times on a regular basis and said, I need prayer on this. And we have a Marco Polo chain. I have a couple of faith friend groups, and we're just like, hey, can you pray for this? Can you pray for that? Some have joined me in fasting when we've needed that.
Cool.
And I think, President Nelson talks about the doctrine of fasting as this ancient practice by other biblical heroes, Moses and David, and we've talked about Ezra and Isaiah and Daniel and Joel and Esther. And so I think as you're considering about what it is that is the chaos surrounding you, where have you been planted? Where is the trauma that you're coming from? Can you turn to some of your maidens? Can you turn to your friends and ask for their fasting and prayer with you? And then also just the idea of sometimes we fast, and I know we've done this in our family, where we were fasting for like this result. And Esther was definitely fasting for a specific result, but we see in verse 16 that she's like, it may not work out. I may perish. Right. So maybe expand. I have found that if I fast and pray for qualities like courage and faith and inspiration, it's not so focused on an outcome. Then more times than not, there's a change. And I feel the answer to those prayers in that fasting. Fasting for a soft heart and patience is very different than fasting so that someone changes their mind or, you know what I mean? Or calls you up and apologizes, or you get the job you want. It's the patience to do what you need to do until you get that. And I know that for our family, we've fasted on a weekly basis over a year period of time for changes for our children. And we still will do that, where it's like, oh, it's time to start fasting weekly. Maybe it's not a 3-day fast, but I love the idea of rallying the troops when you're feeling weak. And I think Esther is teaching that she was going to do this hard thing that Mordecai asked her to do, but she asked for help. Yeah,
I love it. Thanks for making that point. And I love, fasting it's not unique to our church or our religious tradition, right? This is something that's been used for a long time as a tool to connect with God, discover His will, find new strength, and just sort of show our belief and our commitment. Maybe if we could finish with this point in Esther 4, verses 13 and 14. So this is Mordecai encouraging Esther, like, you got to go to the king, and you've got to ask him to spare the Jews. She has not revealed herself as a Jew yet. You know what I mean? And so and she has not been invited to the king's presence. And so this is like punishable by death, it says, if you come to the king and approach his throne uninvited.
Or if you don't come when he calls you.
Right, Vashiti, right?
You're going to die either way.
Right, and so this no doubt took a lot of courage for Esther, and she was, fasting and struggling, and this is going to be really hard. And Mordecai says this, Esther 4:13, then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, he said this, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. Like if he comes down on all the Jews and kills all the Jews, don't think you're going to be spared. He's going to find out sooner or later. And
that you are.
Yeah, and you're going to be killed too. And then this famous line, who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Maybe this is the whole reason why you were born, Esther. And here's the thought I had. For such a time as this, the most important moment of any of our lives is right now. Mm-hmm. All of our baggage, all the mistakes we've made, I don't know the type of baggage and the trauma that Esther had been through up to this point. I don't know about her good decisions, her bad decisions. I don't know who Esther was. We're missing the details. But I love this principle that no matter what you've done up to this point, what matters more than anything else is what you do right now and moving forward. So your life has been dirty and chaotic and crazy. What are you going to do right now? This is the defining moment of all of our lives. Now, right? And how we're going to move forward.
And will you stand up when it's chaotic? Will you stand up knowing that you may not be safe in doing that?
Right. And so I wonder, does our past baggage and trauma ever discourage us from acting in faith right now? Which kind of, I guess, leads us to our invitation, unless you want to say anything else.
No, I would just say another shout out to the importance of reaching out for support, of having faith friends, because I think when you are in that crossroads moment, or you know that it's going to be a risk if you stand up, I can't understate enough how much I have relied on when my faith has felt like the well is so low, right? That those faith friends, my maidens, quote unquote, have said, we're standing with you. And you may not see in you the capacity we see in you, but we're going to stand here as a witness. And I think Mordecai saw that in Esther, saw more in her than maybe she saw in herself. And I'm grateful. I mean, just public shout out, because many of those faith friends watch each week, that they see in me what I don't always see in me, and the value of that.
Beautiful. Well, following the example of Esther and her friends, we invite you this week to try to unlock the power of fasting, maybe on a different level you haven't experienced before, in trying to overcome the obstacles that life has thrown to you. It's our testimony that fasting possesses a lot of power that can help us move forward despite what's happened to us in our past. Thank you for joining us this week. We hope you'll join us next week with Real Talk, Come Follow Me. Do you like Real Talk, Come Follow Me?
Then like and subscribe.